In the absence of a dramatic announcement by President Trump during his recent tour of the Middle East, and there had been some hope that he might endorse the establishment of a Palestinian state, Benjamin Netanyahu is proceeding with Operation Gideon's Chariots. His goal is to destroy the potential for establishing a Palestinian state by pursuing a final solution to the Palestinian problem through mass killing and destruction, to convince those who survive to leave, aided by silence from the West. Is there hope for an alternative to Netanyahu's genocidal plans? Lyndon LaRouche identified a solution to the Palestinian problem in 1975. In April of that year, he traveled to Baghdad, Iraq, for meetings to discuss a change in U.S. policy toward the Arab world and the developing sector in general. Among the topics, a March 12th proposal for a $35 billion fund financed by Arab oil revenues, presented at the 9th Arab Oil Conference in Dubai. Members of the LaRouche movement circulated this proposal, presenting it as a seed crystal for development of the poorest countries and for capital-intensive industrial and agricultural developments in the Middle East. LaRouche undertook an organizing drive to counter Henry Kissinger's petrodollar swindle, in which profits from the 1973-74 oil hoax were used to bail out the Anglo-American banks, in conjunction with International Monetary Fund directed austerity regimes to collect developing sector debt. LaRouche's proposal was integral to his plan to create an international development bank, to replace the IMF with a credit institution to fund investment in the real physical economy, that is, in capital goods, productivity-increasing industrial and agricultural programs, and modern infrastructure. Presented at a press conference in Bonn, West Germany on April 24, 1975, LaRouche's proposal provoked an enraged response from Henry Kissinger, who used his influence to suppress its circulation, while collaborating eventually with British intelligence networks to set up a Get LaRouche task force. The core idea of the IDB was to fund development projects centered around scientific and technological advances to accomplish, first, a massive increase in output and social productivity of agriculture. Second, industrial development utilizing the machine tool principle. And third, the modernization of infrastructure. His trip to Baghdad came during a period of increasing instability in Southwest Asia, following the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Among the events prior to his April meetings were the assassination of Saudi King Fahd in March and the beginning of the 17-year civil war in Lebanon in April. The IDB plan called for a creation of a credit system to provide long-term, low-interest credits to fund capital investment in projects for an area stretching from Syria to Afghanistan and from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. LaRouche wrote that his IDB proposal offered a way out for those seeking peace in the Middle East, as it would enable Israel and key Arab states to begin negotiations for economic cooperation to resolve the Palestinian question by realizing the intent of Pope Paul VI's encyclical Populorum Progressio, which declared, "Development is the new name for peace." For the rest of his life, LaRouche would work tirelessly to promote an economic policy which would provide mutual benefits for Israel and the Palestinians. He met with Jewish and Israeli leaders, such as Nachum Goldman from the World Jewish Congress and Abba Eban, with representatives of Arab governments and institutions, and with heads of state, including Indira Gandhi of India and Jose Lopez Portillo of Mexico. In August 1977, the influential Israel and Palestine newsletter published an article by LaRouche, A Future for the Middle East, in which he summarized his view that agreements in the area of economic cooperation must precede political agreement. He wrote, "There must be direct talks between Israel and the PLO, which center on an economic development package. Here's what he wrote. Any other approach will fail, will be quickly degraded into farce and probable war. However, it is not mere material advantage in itself which provides the basis for peace. It is the fact that the commitment of the governments to realize high rates of scientific and technological progress fosters humanist outlooks. With this goal in mind, he developed what became known as his Oasis Plan to address the problem of the severe shortage of fresh water in the region. The next speaker on this panel, Jason Ross, will present a detailed report on the Oasis Plan. The question I will take up now is, what prevented negotiations from occurring to address this? There were two factors, which I took up recently in an article published April 11th in the Executive Intelligence Review. Before there was the Iron Dome, there was the Iron Wall. First is how the Zionist movement was utilized by the British Empire as an instrument of imperial geopolitics, as part of its divide and conquer policy, extending the City of London's great game in Central Asia into Southwest Asia. And secondly, the adoption by the Zionists of a doctrine designed to give them control over what they called Greater Israel, even though the Jews were a distinct minority in the region. The Iron Wall of Zev Jabotinsky, a security doctrine which is still in effect to this day. What is the Iron Wall? Well, Jabotinsky wrote in 1923, "There has never been an indigenous inhabitant anywhere or at any time who has ever accepted the settlement of others in his country. Any native people views their country as their national home, of which they will always be the complete masters. They will not voluntarily allow not only a new master, but even a new partner. So it is for the Arabs." He continues, "Every indigenous people will resist alien settlers as long as they see any hope of ridding themselves of the danger of foreign settlement. That is what the Arabs in Palestine are doing, and what they will persist in doing as long as there remains a solitary spark of hope that they will be able to prevent the transformation of Palestine into the land of Israel." Now, the solution he proposes is the creation of what he calls an iron wall. Quote, "Zionist colonization, even the most restricted, must either be terminated or carried out in defiance of the will of the native population. This colonization can therefore continue and develop only under the protection of a force independent of the local population, an iron wall which the native population cannot break through. This is our policy toward the Arabs. To formulate it any other way would be hypocrisy. As long as there is a spark of hope that they can get rid of us, they will not sell these hopes. And when not a single breach is visible in the iron wall, will they come to us with proposals for mutual concessions." Now, this has been the strategic doctrine of Israel since 1948, when David Ben-Gurion adopted it during Israel's War of Independence, which the Arabs identify as the Nakba, or catastrophe, as 750,000 people were driven from their homes or killed. Following the 1967 war, it remained a policy for dealing with the Palestinians. A leading feature of this doctrine, in addition to the use of force as a deterrent, is no negotiations or dialogue are allowed. In August 1990, LaRouche intervened again, writing a peace plan in the true interests of Arabs and Israelis. After asserting that there is, quote, no purely political solution, the reason for that is that without a policy of economic development, the Arabs and Israelis have no common basis for political agreement, no common interest. It is only as the Israeli, not as a Zionist, but as an Israeli, finds his or her interest to be the economic development of Israel as a nation, as a producer of vegetables, machine tools, technology, and so forth, and the Arabs similarly, that both have a fundamental common interest in the progressive development of the fertility and fecundity of the land of the entire region. On that basis, for the sake of those respective and common economic interests, a political settlement is possible. The Oslo Accord, which was the product of negotiations conducted secretly at first between representatives of Yitzhak Rabin's government and Yasser Arafat's Palestine Liberation Organization, represented an opportunity to break from the Iron Wall policy. First, it included the idea of trading land seized in the 1967 war by Israel for peace. And secondly, it included 2 economic annexes as part of the treaty, which was signed at a ceremony at the White House on September 13, 1993. At that signing ceremony, Rabin famously offered a toast to, quote, "those with the courage to change axioms," unquote. Annex 3 set forth a protocol on Israeli-Palestinian cooperation in economic and development programs. The first area of cooperation was the field of water. Others were for cooperation in electricity production, energy, finance, transportation, trade, and industry. Annex 4 addressed cooperation in regional development programs. LaRouche's Oasis Plan provided both an outline and specific details on how to proceed, then and now, as its implementation would offer incentives to all nations in the region to achieve peace through economic development for mutual benefit. But it was sabotaged. Netanyahu personally intervened, creating a climate of hate against Rabin in Oslo, from which a settler extremist emerged and assassinated Rabin on November 4, 1995. It was further sabotaged by international financial institutions, which refused to release the funds allocated to begin the projects. 32 years have passed, years of an increasingly brutal occupation under the doctrine of the Iron Wall. Acclaimed historian Avi Shlaim reflected on this in an interview with Jacobin magazine in September 2020. Shlaim said the problem is that Israel's leaders fell in love with the Iron Wall. They fell in love with military power. As a result, they're relying on using military superiority to reach a settlement with the Palestinians. Netanyahu has never shown any interest in resolving the conflict through negotiations, he added. Since 1967, no Israeli government has ever intended to allow an independent Palestinian state. The one exception was the effort by Yitzhak Rabin with the Oslo Accords. The historical significance of Oslo, he said, is that Rabin was the first and only Israeli prime minister who in good faith went toward the Palestinians on the political front. None of his successors were serious about negotiations. Netanyahu, by family and political connections, built his career as a ruthless enforcer of the Iron Wall doctrine. His father was the American secretary for Jabotinsky. Today's Likud party is the successor to Jabotinsky's Herut party. In July 2023, Netanyahu expressed his adherence to this doctrine. Quote, 100 years after the Iron Wall was stamped in Jabotinsky's writings, we are continuing to successfully implement these principles, unquote. The murder of Palestinians and the destruction of Gaza today through Operation Gideon's Chariots are a legacy of the Iron Wall. It must be decisively repudiated by all citizens. It is time to tear down the Iron Wall and let the waters flow. I conclude with an insight from Lyndon LaRouche from his May 23, 1986 response to Shimon Peres's call for a Mideast Marshall Plan. In relations between Arab and Jew in the Middle East, we discern 2 opposing cultural movements among each. On the one side, there's the heritage of the Arab Renaissance. On the other side, the Sufism, which destroyed that Renaissance from within. Post-Hitler Judaism is of 2 general views. The one bases itself optimistically on 2,000 years of Jewish survival under the diaspora. The other takes Hitler's Holocaust pessimistically as its point of departure. The cultural basis for peace between Arab and Jew is the coherence of the impulses of the Arab Renaissance to the principles of 2,000 years of Jewish survival in Europe. The function of regional economic development is to unleash a cultural renaissance among both Arabs and Jews of the region, to establish the movement for stability within each nation, and to foster among the nations a common view of the dignity of the individual, such that the life of the person of each nation is sacred to all nations. Economic development by itself will not suffice to bring the desired renaissance into existence, but that renaissance cannot be effected without a basis in vigorous economic development. In concluding, I repeat, for peace, tear down the iron wall and let the waters of the Oasis Plan flow. Thank you.
Thank you, Harley Schlanger, for that overview. Next, I'd like to bring to the discussion Jason Ross, who is the science advisor to the Schiller Institute and personally worked with Lyndon LaRouche on the Basement Scientific Research Team. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you. So I'm going to build on Harley's discussion of LaRouche's method of economic development through the specific example of his Oasis Plan for Southwest Asia, a program to conquer the region's deserts instead of its people. Creativity is the basis of physical economy. In 1995, LaRouche wrote, "Each person is given the intellectual potential which no animal has, the power to not only imagine states of nature which have never before existed in the universe, but under certain restrictions to impose those ideas efficiently upon the universe generally. The condition to accomplish this is that that imagination is brought into accord with universal lawfulness. It is creativity so defined which represents the individual person's intellect cast in the image of God's efficiently creative intellect. By this means, one is able to recognize among one's own efficient forms of intellectual states a quality which is the reflected image of God." Let's talk about that. What does it mean for the individual person's intellect to be cast in the image of God's efficiently creative intellect, as LaRouche put it? Well, human creativity produces ideas. And if these ideas are valid, they resonate with the universe in such a way that our species can command new powers of nature to achieve new states of existence, new levels of productivity. If our ideas, if our mental concepts were not in coherence with fundamental physical causes, then our explosive population growth, our voyages to the moon and other bodies in the solar system, our improved lifespan and health, none of this would have been possible. Einstein expressed this pithily in this statement: "The eternal mystery of the world is its comprehensibility." I mean, it's a kind of a miracle, isn't it, that these things we have in our heads, these thoughts, are able to cause the outcomes that they are, to fundamentally transform our species' relationship to nature, to each other, and to that process of discovery. We are meant to comprehend the universe and to use that knowledge to improve our mastery over nature and our view of the human individual. But under the Malthusian paradigm, which is now dominating most transatlantic institutions, the relationship between human beings and nature is upside down, backwards. We are taught that human intervention into the natural world is inherently bad by violating some presumably ideal state of nature unsullied by human action. Under that outlook, our species is guilty until proven innocent. And the way to be innocent is to cease to exist. That's the green paradigm. So this green paradigm, it must be overcome to develop this region of the world, Southwest Asia, and to unshackle our species globally from the neo-colonial chains presenting themselves as environmentalism. The most important environment for human beings is not the natural environment. It's not the off-the-shelf environment. What environment do you interact with? The synthetic environment, our created environment, the nurturing environment that we have fostered, that through our improvements has increased our productivity, our standard of life. We interact with electrical grids, with water systems, with sidewalks, with roads, with hospitals, with museums. This is our synthetic environment. Start with that. A few examples of this. In the United States, the Tennessee Valley Authority eliminated the flooding risks of that region, provided for improved navigation on the rivers, created hydroelectricity to spur industrial development, and provided water for irrigation. It was transformational for the region, a synthetic environment. In China, the Three Gorges Dam has ended the periodic death and destruction that was caused formerly by flooding on the Yangtze River. Or think about transportation and our concept of distance. Unlike sea travel, land-based connectivity among nations allows for development along the entire path of travel. A rail line built through a region transforms the potential productivity of that entire region. A ship sailing on the ocean does not have that effect in the middle of the ocean. So high-speed rail, roads, power grids, water grids, sewer systems, subways, museums, hospitals, this is our platform on which our society flourishes. And the LaRouche World Land Bridge proposal, which today is well exemplified by China's Belt and Road Initiative, sees a network of development corridors stretching across the world. It's not only a program for growth, it is an explicit rejection of the anti-growth Malthusianism that we're awash in today. From such a standpoint, with such a policy, a peaceful and prosperous future for the Middle East were possible. LaRouche laid out that future 30 years ago. It is called the Oasis Plan.
Lyndon LaRouche laid it out 30 years ago. It is called the Oasis Plan. Immediately after the 1993 signing of the Oslo Accord in the White House by Israeli and Palestinian leaders, Lyndon LaRouche and his associates urged those parties and the international community to implement economic development projects to advance the peace process. LaRouche and his associates developed the Oasis Plan, which included both certain economic aspects of Annex 4 of the 1993 Oslo Accord, which was called the Protocol on Israeli-Palestinian Cooperation Concerning Regional Development Programs. Plus, it called for additional crucial water, power, and other projects that LaRouche noted were needed in the mid-1970s. This plan, the Oasis Plan, focused primarily on addressing the greatest barrier to development in the region, the shortage of fresh water, through the construction of a network of desalination plants that could turn the plentiful seawater into fresh water. And these plants would not only be on the Mediterranean coast, they would be built along two new canals, one connecting the Red Sea with the Dead Sea, and another connecting it to the Mediterranean. To be clear, these new canals or aqueducts are not for cargo shipping, as an alternative to the Suez Canal. Their purpose is to transport water. Now, because of the low elevation of the Dead Sea, which is more than 400 meters below sea level, the flowing water could also provide hydropower, electricity along the way, which could help power the desalination plants and development more generally. The plants could also be powered by the large quantities of natural gas off the shores of Gaza, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt. But most importantly, the Oasis Plan calls for going beyond hydropower and chemical fuels altogether, through the construction of nuclear power complexes along these canals and on the shores of the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, to produce plentiful electricity and to desalinate seawater to green the vast deserts of the region and to power an industrialization process in Palestine, in Israel, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. The use of nuclear power for energy would liberate the region's hydrocarbon resources to be used chemically to produce industrial materials through intermediate petrochemical products. The nuclear-powered complexes could use inherently safe, pebble-bed, high-temperature gas-cooled reactors of the type just brought into operation in Shidao Bay, China. The new man-made rivers created by desalination will tremendously expand the potential for agricultural and industrial development across the region, making the deserts and the economies bloom. LaRouche explained the necessity of developing new sources of water in a 1994 speech. LaRouche: one cannot meet the indices of water consumption for a modern population, for both the Palestinian and Israeli populations, under present conditions. There is a conflict over water because the Israelis have, frankly, been using their conquests to take water from everybody. It's one of the conflicts with Syria on the Golan Heights issue. It involves in Lebanon the Litani River and things of that sort. So the power and water development have to be accompanied by a network of transportation infrastructure, upgrading the physical connectivity between all the nations of the region, turning a region of conflict, a barrier to connectivity, into a hub of interaction, into a crossroads. A highway connecting the West Bank with the Gaza Strip, linking the Palestinian state, is an absolutely essential feature of this network. Regional highways and rail networks will allow the entire area to operate from a higher economic platform. LaRouche also proposed an expansion of the Suez Canal, with industrial zones to be built on both sides, a task that has been accomplished by Egypt in recent years. LaRouche argued since 1975 that this region, which is the crossroads of civilization and located geographically between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean, and between Europe, Asia, and Africa, that it has a unique position as an industrial and logistics hub. Oil and natural gas will be feedstocks for industrial production of plastics, paints, many other useful materials, rather than being exported as a raw material to be used primarily for simple combustion. The upgrading of connectivity to enable higher levels of development has been a key feature of the 2013 China-proposed Belt and Road Initiative. Using this region as a land bridge between continents, with the major powers like the US, China, Russia, and the EU contributing to its development, will stabilize the area and, along the way, help cement the better relations among the superpowers that will have been necessary to bring it into being. Scientific, technological, and cultural cooperation and exchanges are key elements in the transformative process the Oasis Plan represents. By cooperating to fight the desert, rather than each other, the people of the region will better be able to recognize the humanity in each other, the common capability of human beings to discover principles of nature and to transform our relationship to the environment around us. There are no human animals.
All right. So the deserts of the region cry out for development. And this plan, it is not some distant aspiration. It's not a pipe dream of what we might do years in the future after peace is achieved. It is only through an international paradigm of relations among countries supporting this approach, as discussed in the first panel today, that peace would even be possible. Every minute, the genocide continues, brings more death, more bitterness, more difficulty in achieving shared prosperity. It must end. And the geopolitical paradigm, which is the source of most conflict in the world today, must be replaced with a new security and development architecture, and that on a global scale. This is not a regional issue. Now, although it is challenging to imagine a lasting, meaningful peace between Israelis and Palestinians, we can look to a meaningful historical precedent of the 30 Years' War, which drowned Europe in blood, spilled in Protestants killing Catholics, Catholics killing Protestants. in a spiral of revenge that left some regions with less than a third of their pre-war population. Politically, borders and territories were astonishingly fragmented. Imagine working out a peace arrangement in this kind of environment, right? So how was this conflict resolved? In 1648, the Treaty of Westphalia brought an end to the decades of warfare, ended the 30 Years' War. How? By looking towards the future, to an interest in the benefit of the other and the principle of forgiveness. Article 1 of the Treaty of Westphalia includes this text: "A Christian, general, and permanent peace, and true and honest friendship must rule. And this peace must be so honest and seriously guarded and nourished that each part furthers the advantage, honor, and benefit of the other. A neighborliness should be renewed and flourish for peace and friendship, and flourish again." Article 2 says, "On both sides, all should be forever forgotten and forgiven. What has from the beginning of the troubles, no matter how or where, from one side or the other, happened in terms of hostility, so that neither because of that, nor for any other reason or pretext, should anyone commit or allow to happen any hostility, unfriendliness, difficulty, or obstacle in respect to persons, their status, goods, or security itself, or through others, secretly or openly, directly or indirectly, under the pretense of the authority of the law, or by way of violence within the empire, or anywhere outside of it, and any earlier contradictory treaties should not stand against this. Instead, the fact that each and every one, from one side and the other, both before and during the war, committed insults, violent acts, hostilities, damages, and injuries, without regard for persons or outcomes, all this should be completely put aside, so that everything, whatever one could demand from another under his name, will be forgotten to eternity." It wasn't easy to reach this arrangement, but the magnitude of the concept conveyed in this treaty, I think, points to the kind of thinking that made the resolution of this horrible religious warfare a possibility. This Westphalian principle has explicitly been under attack by such Malthusians as the City of London's Tony Blair, who announced in 1999, in a speech, I think, in Chicago, that the era of Westphalia was over. We're in a new era. So how is reconciliation in Southwest Asia possible? LaRouche wrote in 1978 in his A Machiavellian Solution for Israel, "The only human thing is to give the lives and suffering of the dead meaning, not merely by establishing peace in the Middle East, but by establishing the basis for peace, which gives fulfillment to the lives of the present and future generations of the Palestinians and other Arabs, and thus purpose and fulfillment to the sacred lives of the dead." This, of course, applies to Israelis as well. Tens of thousands of people are already confirmed dead. No doubt tens of thousands more of those reported missing have perished as well. Hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million, will carry the scars, mental and physical, imposed by the State of Israel. The question to us is, how can we give meaning to the lives of those who have perished, to those who have suffered? Thank you.